Okay, well, welcome to DIYRE, the first in a series of videos on showing you guys how to build a rotary engine from scratch. I'd like to introduce my friend Paul Morgan, who will be instructing me on how to build the engine. And the first thing we'll do in the first video is talk about old parts that have come out of an engine that's had a broken apex seal. So the first thing, Paul, I suppose we should have a look at the parts.
Definitely.
And you can explain to me and the people exactly what went wrong with this engine and what could be reused if we were to reuse some of the parts, and what we would need to replace if we decide to replace them. So
okay.
Yeah, talk away.
It was a Series 6 engine originally. What's actually killed it is a broken apex seal.
Okay.
You see here, it's obviously damaged, broken. Parts of the apex seal going through the engine and the rotor housing, causing obviously the engine to fail.
So that'll actually, because the apex seal's broken, it'll actually score the rotor housing, won't it? Jeez.
This is the result of the rotor housing. As you can see, it's caused scoring throughout the rotor housing.
So that's obviously
not reusable. No, definitely not. Definitely
not. That's a new rotor housing there.
Exactly.
What about the rotor itself? Is that's
the rotor itself is damaged and really unusable. Unusable.
Okay.
So it's really a throwaway item. Good probably for a door stopper or
some sort of trophy or something. Are these the old?
They're the old apex seals. Yep.
So these are actually a three-piece.
It's a 2mm three-piece.
Okay.
You see here, there's a few broken fragments.
Oh yeah. So yeah, doesn't look good. All right. Now, as well as obviously the damaged rotor and the associated rotor housing, is there anything wrong with these side plates?
Okay. On close inspection, you'll be able to see corrosion, and it's very evident on these sort of later model engines, especially around these points here around the seals.
Okay.
Yeah, especially at this point here, you can see where the corrosion. This is one of the better plates.
So could you reuse this particular plate, or would you recommend
this particular plate? Yes, you could.
Okay.
This plate here, I would say no. You can see how.
Oh yeah, it's a lot thinner right there.
Much thinner. There's also a few broken through sections.
Gotcha. Alright, so that's one we definitely wouldn't use.
Mm-hmm.
What about this guy over here, mate?
Center plate doesn't look too bad. That's certainly reusable.
Okay.
This one here's got much less corrosion than the other two plates.
Is it corrosion caused by the antifreeze, like the anti-corrosant that was used in the water, or is it not enough for that, or is it just the way it works?
It really sort of depends, because later model engines are more prone to it than early model engines. So whether it be the fact that they get hotter, or there might be some sort of electrolysis caused by extra sort of spark or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
It certainly could be a current problem with the engine that causes them.
Sure.
Also too, we're looking at the plates and the surface of the plates. We can see where the inner and outer oil control bands have gone. You see the scoring marks that go around there. And there's also a stepped wear on this side here from the side seal. And there is a measurement obviously for that, that once it goes to a certain point, it has to be machined or replaced.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing you do with the side plates is check for the flatness with a straight edge and feeler gauges.
Okay.
To make sure that it is flat.
Sure.
So assuming you're not going to get it machined.
Yep. Okay.
These are the front and rear stationary gears. They should be checked. Make sure there's no chips or any marks, indentations, cracks.
You got the bearing inside there as well, mate.
Yes, this one's a new bearing that's been put in. You see, this is a Series 6 type.
So how can you tell if it's a Series 6 type?
Well, the Series 6 one is actually the same as the early factory race, and it has a groove that's cut in behind in the stationary gear, and extra windows put in for oil flow.
Right, okay. And so what's that What's the difference between these two stationary gears?
Okay, well this is the rear, this one's the front.
Okay.
And fundamentally the gears themselves are the same phasing.
So these are obviously okay to reuse?
These are perfect.
Great, we've got those new bearings pressed in there already, ready to go?
Yes, and they've been clearanced, ready to go.
Good stuff.
The reuse of bearings is quite permissible as long as there's no scale, flaking or any copper coming through or any real sort of seizing marks on it.
Okay.
The bearings themselves, usually most people that are going to build their own engine are going to reuse the old bearings, because fundamentally to put a new bearing in and to actually clearance it is quite a big job.
Right.
So a lot of people don't need to go to that expense.
Okay.
If it came out fine of the engine, then it is fine. Reuse it.
Have we got any of the old ones around here?
Well, we do. We have a
rotor bearing.
A rotor bearing.
Yeah.
These ones have been pulled out, but as you can see, there's a few marks as shined up.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, they're not too bad. You could reuse these.
Okay.
But whether you'd want to,
yeah,
it's entirely up to your budget.
Yeah, okay. Now, is there any like tolerances, measurements that can be done as far as wear, like a wear indicator? Like, is there a certain wear distance?
There is. You need to measure the eccentric shaft and also the bearing to make sure there's enough clearance or not too much.
Right, okay. No problem.
Okay. All the other parts we've got here is the oil pump.
Yep.
Basically, needs to be checked. It's got a few little marks on it.
Okay.
You see on the sides, check for wear. You see just a slight bit of wear just here. Fundamentally, it's not too bad. That's certainly reusable.
Okay, good.
It's a bit dirty.
We'll clean all that up.
Exactly. Oil pumps are normally pretty good with Mazdas. They're the sort of item that you don't have to replace every time you rebuild an engine, unless it's obviously died because there was an oil pressure problem.
Sure.
Fundamentally, you wouldn't have to replace them. Check them for clearance, and if they're fine, reuse them.
Okay.
The sort of item that generally doesn't wear out.
Right, right. So what's next in looking at what we can use and
Some of the other parts we've got. Timing chain, which go onto the sprocket for the oil pump. These generally in the early engines tend to stretch a bit, but they actually have a tensioning device which tensions it back up.
Yep, yep.
The later ones don't stretch as much, and if there's too much play in them, they have to be replaced.
Right, okay.
But normally you wouldn't find that unless it's done a lot of Ks.
Yeah.
Okay, there's other gears and bearings and surfaces to check for. This is a thrust plate. Basically, you'd be looking on this surface and this surface for wear.
So other than having a mark there, that's actually probably okay.
This one's fine.
Yeah.
What you would see is marks actually into the steel,
right,
gouges and so forth, and these are the surface that the bearings run on.
Yeah.
So they need to be pretty good, and this one's fine.
Okay, good.
Generally, if these are fine, you find then the bearings are fine. Just check the surfaces. If there's no deep scratches or grooves, generally you can reuse those.
Okay.
So then that generally 9 times out of 10 they're fine, as long as the end float will set up okay.
Yeah, okay. And we'll talk about the end float when we go to assemble the engine.
Exactly.
Okay, Neil? All right, yeah.
This is obviously for the timing chain, just another sprocket, and also we have the front counterbalance, which also has a little shim that just sits inside. Obviously you need to check that shim to make sure there's no gouges and so forth.
Will that come out, or do you need a new counterbalance if that's damaged?
No, it comes out.
Comes out. Okay.
Yep, it just pops out.
Okay, great.
And you'll notice one side is a little bit rougher.
And the smooth side
Smooth side goes down where the bearing contact is.
Yep, okay. Good stuff.
Through bolts. These are the good ones. These are Series 6. They also have extra ribbing here for strength. Stop them from flexing.
And the only thing that need to be replaced on those, Paul, would be these
washers.
little washers.
Yep. Yep. Now all of them are the same, bar one.
Okay.
You'll notice the one that's different has got the M on it.
Gotcha.
And you'll notice it's physically longer. So there's only the one that's different. All the rest are the same. And it can go in any bolt hole apart from obviously this one.
Right.
We've covered the rotor housings. This one here also came out of the engine, and you can notice some scoring through the sides here. You need to check with your criteria,
Yep.
the rebuild criteria, whether or not this would still be acceptable. I wouldn't use this in a good engine,
Okay.
but in an engine that you're putting together for yourself, that might be a fairly cheap sort of engine, it should be fine.
It should be fine. Because there's not any real noticeable wear on the edges, is there?
No. Chromium, as far as like most of the plates you get, the chromium will be off the bottom
Yeah.
and can extend in 2 millimetres
Okay.
on either side before it needs to be replaced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll obviously post all those tolerances up again just to make it easier to get an idea of what you can use and what you can't use
Exactly.
as far as those go. But okay, that looks good.
This is the this fits in the actual eccentric shaft in the front, and what it does is actually it helps speed up the engine as far as the oil temperature
Right.
by using it as a bypass. And once it gets hot enough, obviously then it seals off.
Do they get damaged, those things?
They can do. Most performance engines, you would replace it with a pellet,
Right.
a blanking
Okay.
pellet.
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay, last couple of items, we've got the front nut, and obviously then the front pulley setup. This is obviously Series 6, so there's a bit more sort of involved, but generally this section here will all be the same. The only thing really to look for is just to make sure there's a bit of wear on the side here, but it's not too bad. What you would do if there was a bit of a step, you may hit it with a bit of wet and dry,
Sure.
just to take that sharp edge off.
Okay, Paul. Let's have a look at the corner seals and some of these oil control rings, because they look like they're pretty worn.
If you strip down a rotor,
Yep.
these are the parts that would come out of it. You're basically looking at an outer oil control O-ring, an inner, corner seals, apex seal springs, apex seals, assist pieces.
Right, so that's this piece is broken off the end of the apex seal.
Exactly. And you also have side seals.
Yeah. Now, what about the sides? I mean, obviously we can't use some of these corner seals because they're actually broken.
Exactly.
And the apex seals, the pieces are broken off, and some of these apex seals are broken in half totally. But like these side seals, are they reusable?
They are to an extent. If you check the thickness,
Right. Okay.
generally they don't wear, unless the engine has done a lot of Ks, they don't wear that much in width, it's length.
Right.
And that's where we need to check from where they come in contact
Gotcha.
with the corner seal. They actually
Gotcha.
wear.
Yeah.
You'll see that point on the corner seal
Yes, you
here.
can too. Got you.
These are the keyhole type, which have normally a rubber plug that goes into them
Right.
to help seal.
So some of them, though, I understand, actually don't have anything
That's correct.
inside them.
Yes,
Does
the
that
early
make them
solid
weaker,
ones.
or?
What does make them weak, and that's why that other one is broken.
Okay.
Preferably, whenever I build an engine, I use the solids.
Okay. Fair enough.
You can buy 2mm solids aftermarket,
Okay.
and obviously they're a bit more expensive, but you don't have this problem of failure,
Right.
of them breaking.
Okay. So obviously we really need to go through some of these parts and you know, check the tolerances and so on,
Exactly.
and measure them, and we could sort of probably salvage some of those seals.
Exactly.
Some of those side seals.
It's the old story. If you're in any doubt, replace them.
Right. Okay. Okay. No problem.
There's a set criteria of spring height
Yep.
once they're sat on a flat surface
Mm-hmm.
to check them.
Right.
They're very cheap. You wouldn't necessarily reuse them.
Okay. Good.
Even on a cheap engine, you would replace them. Same with the O-rings. They're the first things to wear out.
Yeah. Well, all these come in the gasket set, don't they?
They do.
So like.
Well, no, these actually come separate. If you buy a gasket kit,
Mm-hmm.
these actually don't come with it. You have to buy these separate.
Right.
All the rotor items are separate to a seals kit.
I got
So-
you. Yep.
So whenever you buy a seals kit, you've got to buy all these,
Yep.
which will be extra.
Okay, well that's quite good, because it means that you can pick and choose on the things you really do
Exactly.
need to replace.
And you can mix and match, so you've got the best of
Yeah.
everything. So if you want to go for 3mm apex seals, you get the solids
Yeah.
and so forth. And you can get obviously competition outer springs, and obviously different kinds of side seal springs. And obviously the thing to look out for, you must know what type of engine you've got, whether it's an early or a late,
Right.
because the rotors are different,
Mm-hmm.
and there's different thickness side seals, apex seals, and matching corner seals.
Right.
So you need to know what year your engine is.
Yep.
It's most important. Otherwise you'll order the wrong part.
Yep. Sure. And we'll include a list of part numbers with
Certainly.
the set of the videos.
Which will help out a lot.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Good stuff.
There's also
Yep.
steel bands that go with these.
Right.
They're not here at the moment. Actually, I'll grab one.
We've got a new one over there.
This is actually a new band. As you can see, there's a small amount of chromium just here.
Yeah, just a very small near the edge.
And there's obviously a certain tolerance on how much actually this is worn. Once it gets
Right.
over a certain point, it creates too much wear on the plate,
Right. Okay.
so it has to be replaced.
Yeah.
And obviously these were beyond.
Worn, so they're thrown away.
Exactly.
Yeah. Gotcha. Good. All right. Well, I suppose is that all we really need to talk about as far as the old parts go?
The best thing to do is clean them up.
Yep.
The parts that you think that you can reuse,
Mm-hmm.
because then when you clean them up, you might find you may not be able to. So you need to really have a good look at them.
Sure.
And obviously we need to check some tolerances and so forth.
Yep. Now, luckily for this build video, we're using mostly new parts,
We are.
so we should be okay as far as wear goes, because they're
Mhm.
brand new,
Exactly.
and as far as the tolerances and measurements go for those, but we still have to measure certain things.
We do.
Yep, and especially to do with things like side seals.
Yes,
Does they need
the
to be-
actual side seals, when you buy them new,
Yep.
and this is a good reason why, if you can reuse your old ones, if they meet the tolerance, they actually come oversized,
Yeah.
because all the pitch centres of the corner seals on the rotors are slightly different.
Right.
So what has to happen is they're made about 2 to 3mm longer than standard,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to be machined down.
Yeah.
So
Do
there's
we
a lot of
machine
work
them
in
down, or do we grind?
Actually,
grind
when I
them
say machine, they're ground
ground
on a
okay.
stone
Okay. Sure.
and they've got to be stoned at the right angle. You'll notice if you get a close up on that edge, it's actually on an angle. You have to follow that angle, so it gives a good seal. Otherwise, I'll only have one small piece touching against the corner seal.
Gotcha. Yeah, because the corner says rounded.
And it's
also.
rounded, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
got to be rounded as well.
Gotcha.
So there's a bit of an art to that.
Yep. Well, we're here to learn that out.
Exactly.
All right. Sounds good. All right, Paul. Well, that looks like we've covered everything to do with the old engine parts and what can be reused and so on. You mentioned something before about making sure these parts are clean before you even attempt to reuse them. What's the best way to clean them?
The best way to probably clean them is you can either put the plates through a chemical bath treatment,
Okay.
same with the rotors, or you can use generally a parts washer with clean parts washing fluid, and then obviously thoroughly blown out.
Sure. And so do you have to actually use any like wet and dry, or do you actually have to clean the surfaces, say of the plates, if we were to reuse the plates?
Reuse the plates? No, generally not. They're that smooth from previous work the engine's done, so no.
So even if we clean it as best we can and there's still these like little wear marks, that's okay?
That's right.
All right, great. And so for the rotor, obviously we're not using this rotor because it's damaged, but see where there's combustion sort of like carbon build-up?
Which could flake off.
That's right, so you don't want that going through the motor.
As I say, you can get them chemically dipped, or most people would, from their own home, use gasket stripper. Gasket stripper will remove carbon and they will come up like brand new. Just a bit of elbow grease. So
I've actually got another rotor down here. See, this one looks like it's been cleaned in the past.
It has, and you can see what they've done is they've used like emery paper. You see what's going rusty?
Yeah, because
they've taken the actual coating. They actually come with a coating. If you saw a brand new rotor, they're actually golden, and that's the cadmium plating over it. And what they've done is they've actually taken it off.
Now, is that going to affect the way the engine goes?
Not really, not unless it's sitting around for a long time. Once you get a build-up of carbon on it, that will seal it anyway. Okay.
Now, like for example, when we go to reuse this rotor, how can we safely remove the surface rust that's on it?
Well, obviously the only real way is to do the same again. What actually caused it.
And then just reuse it. Then use it straight away.
Yes. But ideally, as I say, use a gasket stripper or chemically bathe it, which will remove all the carbon and excess material, and leave the original cadmium plating.
Great. Good stuff. All right, Paul. Looks like it's time to talk about the new parts. I've got all the new parts laid out here, which looks quite cool. And so what have we got over here with all these rotors and stuff like that?
Okay, Lance, what we've got, some beautiful new rotors. And obviously all the seals for each rotor, comprising of oil bands, outer and inner oil control rings, all the springs, apex seal springs, corner seal springs, side seals and side seal springs.
Great. And okay, and obviously all of these parts fit into the rotor.
They do.
Which is what we'll be talking about a bit later on.
So we'll be basically assembling the rotors.
Great. Now, what else do we need to look at with these rotors? I mean, these are obviously brand new.
Yes.
I remember you saying something about the balance or these markings. What do all these markings mean?
Okay. If you have a look on the faces, you'll notice there are some marks all around, and most of them don't make sense. But you'll find actually a balance mark, which is a C. So this balance is a C. On this rotor, you'll see it's also a C.
So they're a matching pair?
They're a matching pair.
Okay.
The fundamental rules are that you can mix rotors to a certain point of where you can run an A with a B, and if you've got a B rotor you can run an A and a C with a B rotor. They can only be one apart.
Sure, okay.
So if you had an A and a D, they wouldn't be compatible.
Okay, so it's sort of like one balance away from each other.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. And so what's the most common? Is a C balance the most common type of
generally a C and
rotor?
Yeah, probably a B and a C would be the most common.
Sure.
And it does go up to E.
Right. Because these are brand new rotors, they've actually already got the bearings pressed in there.
Yes, they actually come with bearings pressed in if you buy new rotors.
Oh, that's quite good. And obviously that's where the hooks into the stationary gears. Oh, that little cog there. Now, is there any difference between front and rear rotors? Like, is there a special rotor designed? Like, can you buy front and rear rotors, or are they identical other than the balance?
Generally, they're identical.
Okay.
Unless you actually, some of the 12As
Sure.
have a deep leading recess,
Okay.
and they have to be front or rear.
Gotcha.
You have to have a matching pair. So they would say actually on the combustion chamber,
Yep.
front and rear.
Right. Gotcha.
So you have to be careful with the 12As as far as that's concerned. 13Bs, basically they're all the same.
Okay. Now later on, when we get to assembling the rotors, it does take quite a bit of time because it is a tricky job, isn't it?
It is. We talked about it earlier. The side seals come over length.
Yeah.
And they need to be ground
down, so there's
to the
quite a
correct
bit of work
size.
in getting those, and obviously these apex seals. I mean, these are steel apex seals.
Yes, they come already cut to length, so
Right.
there's no modification to those whatsoever.
And these are a two-piece.
And this one in particular is a two-piece. Generally, this type of engine would have a three-piece,
Right.
but Mazda's decided that for strength and reliability, they're going to go to a single main piece with the assist piece on the end.
Okay. So that little piece on the end there that you can see is like definitely joined on there. That's glued on.
Glued, it is.
So we've got to be careful of that, don't we? Because it could break off.
Exactly. And what it does is the spring pressure actually lands on this section of the assist piece. And if you were to put the engine together without that glued or a rubber assist piece which fits on the apex seal just here,
Yep.
the spring pressure would push the assist piece off and you wouldn't be able to assemble the engine.
Right. And so when we go to do it, obviously these all match up. So
Exactly.
these go in there like so, and into that one goes in the inside that again. Okay.
Okay, so if you're using a second-hand apex seal and you can't glue this section, the assist piece onto the apex seal, you can actually buy from Mazda this rubber strip, which is cut into a small strip and is inserted on the apex seal just here on the face of it just here, which takes a spring pressure off the assist piece.
Correct.
So it can then seat.
Okay.
So the engine can be assembled.
Is that only a sort of a fairly new innovation, this thing? Or
No,
Oh,
very
okay.
old.
Okay.
These can be cut obviously to suit 2 or 3 mil,
Okay.
and you buy them from Mazda.
Okay.
And these actually burn away. Once the engine actually starts, the heat will then burn it, and then all the pressure then will then revert back onto the assist piece.
Good. All right, Paul. That's the rotors that we just talked about. We've got this isn't a new eccentric shaft. That's the old one, but it's actually been linished and clearanced.
It has.
For these rotors. So we've had that done for the build prior. But what's the process of clearancing? I mean, obviously this shaft's been polished so that the clearancing is correct. There's two ways of doing it, I understand. You can do it either to the eccentric shaft or the bearing.
Exactly. You can do it 2 ways, as you say. It's easy, obviously, to clearance the bearings than it is to the eccentric shaft because the bearings are softer.
Right.
Most people would spin these up in a lathe with Scotch-Brite and clearance them to the actual rotor. And that's obviously done by measuring the actual points and then individually checking them for clearance to the rotors. Each one might be slightly different to each other because depending on if material needs to be taken off.
Okay.
You see this one's been beautifully polished.
It's ready to go, that one. Okay, we've got a new rotor housing here.
New rotor housings. Again, there's not much to look out for, obviously, if you're using new parts. If these were obviously second hand, they have to be immaculately cleaned. Any this surface needs to be absolutely perfect to get a good seal and to bed onto the actual plates. So they need to be cleaned out. The earlier housings have a groove cut in. The later ones have a groove cut in the steel plate. That's the difference.
So the older rotor housings actually had the O-rings actually inside the rotor header.
Which means you can't use the early and mix them with the early and later.
Gotcha.
Unless you were to cut O-ring grooves into these plates, if these plates were the early type ones.
Right. So with your experience with engine building and so on, and obviously you've built many engines of both new and old, Do you think the way that Mazda's doing it now is the better way? Is it easier for rebuilding, or?
It doesn't really make much difference.
So what do you think they changed it? What do you think they moved it onto the plate?
That's a good question. You'd have to ask Mazda.
Really? Okay. All right. So there must have been some reason behind it.
There would have been, but there's nothing really that I'm aware of.
Right.
That there's any real gain over doing one or the other.
Right. Okay.
Maybe it was because they've got one generation of engine to the next.
Right.
To make them uncompatible.
Great. Okay. And so what are the difference between these plates? Obviously the rotor housings are the same.
Yes.
But we've got
yes, we've got a middle plate or intermediate plate,
yeah.
and also a rear plate.
Okay, and they're brand new.
These ones here are brand new. And obviously we'd be checking for wear if these were second hand to make sure that they're not worn.
Gotcha.
Or any corrosion.
Okay. What are some of these other pieces we've got over here?
We have some seals from the seals kit. The seals kit basically, depending on what year it is, will have all different O-rings. So you need to know which one's which. And probably for the first time builder, that's probably the hardest thing.
Right.
So fundamentally what we've got here, we've pulled the kit apart and taken all the things that we don't need for our engine rebuild and put them to the side so they don't get messed up.
Yep.
Fundamentally, if you're not sure of which O-ring to use, and for the first time engine builder, you wouldn't know which one is which. So you would, from your old engine, you would keep the seals and then match them up to the kit so you know which one is which. These are the through bolt washers, and we have stationary gear O-ring which goes on the back. We have sump gasket, timing cover gasket, oil pickup gasket. This is the timing cover seal.
Mm-hmm.
And we have some O-rings which are for the rear plate, and also we have here our 4 rotor housing O-rings.
Great.
These are the gas seals which go in on the section here of the plate, and we also then have the water seal which goes on the outer point. Okay, this is from a later kit, these water O-rings, and you'll see they've got the white band.
Yep.
The early ones don't actually have that, which makes it a bit more difficult. You'll see this surface is quite matte.
Mm.
It's got a slight sort of rib in it, and you'll find that the other side would be nice and smooth and shiny. So it's actually quite difficult to see which one is which, and obviously it can go around the wrong way.
So there's a special way they've got to go in, and that's why they're colour coded.
That's why they've colour coded to make it idiot proof.
Right. Let's hope we get that right then. So yeah, that's good.
So if you're using an early rebuild kit, you've got to be aware that if it's shiny on one side and matte on the other, the matte side is the contact side.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, Paul, we've spoken about the new parts. This looks like it's all the tools we need to build the engine.
Mm.
So there's not actually a lot of equipment required, really, is there? Some of it's pretty specialised.
It is.
Yeah, let's just talk briefly about what we got.
Okay. Most of the parts really are fairly reasonably priced. The most expensive item obviously is the dial indicator, but the rest of them are general parts, like you've got your tension wrench, you've got a straight edge, you've got obviously some writing equipment, cleaning equipment for the parts, a stone, got a syringe here filled with Vaseline or petroleum jelly, some Hylamar, small screwdriver, oil can, and either a rubber mallet or nylon hammer such as this. The only other item you need really of any great value is obviously for the rear nut, which joins either the rear counterbalance or flywheel, and obviously it's a decent size.
What size is that?
And that's 54mm.
54mm. Okay. All right, and yeah, obviously a lot of pressure needs to be put onto that flywheel nut.
Yes, that's normally done up to approximately 280 to 300 foot-pound.
Right.
So that's a fair bit of pressure.
Yep, fair enough. All right, that's good. And these that dial test indicator, what do we actually use that for?
Okay. The dial indicator is used for setting up end float,
Sure.
and also can be used to measure the wear on the plates for the side seals.
Okay, great. So obviously when we get to the almost completed assembly of the engine, we then need to use this tool.
Most definitely. To set up the end float, you need to have one of these.
Right.
Whether you borrow one to build the engine or not.
Sure.
An outlay of $200
That's
plus.
right. So they're not that expensive really, are they? To
No.
buy. Like that was about $150, that one.
Yes,
So that's actually not too bad for something that's a precise instrument.
exactly. And it'll last for many, many years.
Yeah, and it's probably, one of the reasons why some of the engines don't last as long, because some people don't actually do the end float setting, do they?
That's right. And it is very critical.
Okay, Paul, so, we've been looking at the wear on these side plates, and this is a good use of the tool, the DTI, was it the dial test indicator?
Mm-hmm.
So I've got that set up on there, and we've got it calibrated to 0. So what do? We move this thing up and down along the face of the plate.
Yes, mainly on the wear section where the side seal comes in contact with the plate, so we can test
So that's not
the run out.
It's actually moving a little bit though, isn't it? So that's showing there's a little bit of wear there.
Generally you can see these machine marks on the plate,
Yeah.
so there's very little wear. The main wear, of course, is the high wear area on the hot side of the engine.
Yeah, and you can actually see that dial moving slightly, can't you?
Yes.
Show us again? Yeah.
It's only very slightly, but that means that there is wear there.
If that meets tolerance, then the plate can be reused without grinding.
Right. Okay. Good. And obviously we need a pretty nice socket set as well, so that'll do the trick.
Everything should be metric, being Japanese. Your standard sizes are 14, 17 and 19 for most bolts.
Great. So really, there really isn't a lot of specialised equipment required to build an engine.
No, there isn't. So, which makes it great for do-it-yourself engine builders.
'Cause that's been the problem out there, isn't it? That it's just an unknown thing.
Mm.
And so most rotary enthusiasts, if they do need an engine rebuild or something like that, they think that you really do need specialised equipment, and
it costs a lot of money.
It costs a lot of money and so on, because
Yes.
there generally is, quite, depending on where you go, quite high cost to get your engine built.
There is.
And obviously that's why we're trying to do this video.
Mm. And certainly, look, if you can share some of these parts with your friends, if they've got rotaries as well.
Yep, sure. That's the way of doing it too, so you can share the cost between a few people.
Exactly.
And that's good. It's good to see, because there's probably more equipment required to build a piston engine.
Exactly, there would be. And I mean, the price of the parts really would be no more than what it would cost, or in fact it would be less than what it would cost to get someone to build it. And then you've always got those parts to build others.
Sure.
So initially you'll save money and
Good.
it'll flow on.
Good stuff. All right, Paul. Now we're to the point we're actually going to clean these rotors just before we start assembling them.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've got here is a real simple setup, just a small area that we can actually clean these without making a big mess. And we've got some parts cleaner,
Yes.
a special solvent that's actually good for cleaning these rotors.
Parts cleaners are very good for cleaning them.
Right.
The only thing is, the actual rotors themselves, if they've got carbon deposits on them, this won't take it off.
Right.
This will clean all the oil, all the sort of foreign matter that might have got in, any grit and so forth. So best thing to do, obviously, firstly, is to hit it with gasket stripper, and that'll actually take all the carbon off.
Okay. So these being new, it should be pretty straightforward to get this clean. So there's not a lot of stuff to do. What's the best thing? Just dip it in there, or?
Dip it in
And clean it while it's in there.
and flush out all the
All the
foreign
stuff,
matter.
and just use like a good stiff brush.
Be fairly careful with the bearing. Don't sort of score it, but they're fairly hardy.
Right.
So the main thing is obviously to get all the matter from inside.
So it's more where the stationary gear goes that you've got to be careful of.
It's where you can't see. That's what you want to clean.
Right.
Because you can clean the parts you can see, or the sections of the rotor you can see, and probably on the other side as well.
Yep.
When you finish that side, you can clean the parts you can see, but if you can't see other parts, chances are they may be dirty.
Right, okay. And once we've actually done this cleaning, how do we dry it off? Just blow it off, dry
Yes,
it off
it
with
needs
that?
to be blown off with an air
There
compressor.
you go. Yeah.
They can dry, depending on your fluid. Your fluid, if it's nice and clean, it'll air dry in the heat. But if it's a bit oily, it may take a while. So the best thing is obviously to blow. You don't want any of this fluid on your oil control O-rings.
Okay, so you've got to really dry it off nicely.
Really dry it
and
off.
get rid of all
If it gets
sort
onto any rubber, it'll start to break it up.
Okay, sure. And what about the surface of the rotors? Can you clean all those as
You
well?
can clean those, yes, certainly. They're easy to get out, so if you weren't to clean them, that wouldn't be a major harm. You'd clean them afterwards.
So is that enough, or do we actually need more cleaning than that?
As long as if you put your either a white or clean rag inside and you can't see any grit come out, then it's
Yep.
clean.
So even though they're brand new, they still really do need a good
Oh yes,
clean-up.
they'll have sort of like casting sand and grit inside, certainly.
Okay. What other parts do we need to clean? I mean, we've obviously got to do the other rotor, but what other parts do we actually need
All
to
the
clean?
other parts that were from the original blown engine need to be
Sure.
cleaned thoroughly,
Thoroughly.
and then
okay.
we'll recheck them to
Okay.
make sure they're right, because there might be things that are covered up by carbon and so forth that we just can't see.
Okay. Now, what about the new rotor housings and the side plates? Do they need to also go through
Everything
this
needs to be
process?
cleaned.
Everything. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Mazda generally, when they supply all the parts, they're not clean. They have an oil over them, and in transit they can get dust and so forth. It
Sure.
really traps it
Sure.
right into it.
Okay. All right. Good one.